do a couple videos a week solo where I'm trying to break down sort of a single topic and think about it critically and go into as much detail as possible. And then I do a couple streams a week as well. Sunday night is like a weekly news breakdown I have a co-host for. We also take calls from our audience on Wednesday night. So there's kind of short form focused content. There's long form sort of conversational content. And all of this is coming from, I suppose, it's news and current events analysis from, I shy away from titles, I suppose, but I consider myself to be a Constitution-focused person. You might say libertarian or conservative perspective, I suppose, but I don't like to become ideologically boxed in. So, but that's pro-freedom, pro-liberty, pro-Constitution perspective is the general idea. And
right.
And so the website's mattchristiansenmedia.com to find all of that material.
Yeah, I originally found you when I stumbled across your one of the things that were voted on in Montana, the Born Alive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that issue was just unbelievable that actually was voted on the way that it was. It almost seemed like that couldn't be possible. And so that was what first got me hooked on your videos. And then from there, I kind of rabbit holed into some other things. And I thought, this guy would be a really good guest to have on. Your perspective is very interesting. And not only that, what was most interesting to me was that your beginnings, that you used to be sort of, what could I say? You used to be an anti-gunner, and that you've changed your perspective on that, or could you tell us about that?
I don't know if I would use the title anti-gun, but someone who was not really interested in guns as a day-to-day. And I used to be a Democrat voter. And so when you're in that mindset and it's not necessarily an issue that is of huge concern to you, you'll buy a lot of the talking points, the common sense reforms that we need, those sorts of things. But my interest increased over time, and especially once we got into 2018 and there was the Parkland shooting and there was a lot more discussion about trying to crack down on this and crack down on that. And my political worldview had already shifted quite a bit at that point, because I had seen prior, at least from my perspective, what I viewed as people attacking free speech, which has always been an important principle to me. And when I saw what I saw was my side, so to speak, attacking free speech, and that made me think, well, what else are they wrong about? You start thinking about how you apply your principles in the speech realm to how you apply those principles to the concept of self-defense and the right to arm yourself and all that. Got me more interested in guns as a philosophical matter.
Yeah.
Then when Parkland happened, there was a lot more talk about gun control, and that made me realize, well, if they want to get rid of these things, I probably need to understand the technology, and I need to know how to use all of this better, and I need to be prepared to defend myself. If they don't want me to have this, I should probably learn more about it. And so I went and got my concealed carry at that point, and it's been 4+ years of building a collection that I have now and learning more about guns and trying to become more proficient. And I think I've heard people say this. I've heard Steven Crowder and others say it, and I don't like to reduce issues to just oversimplify things, because I think people can disagree on and have good information and disagree honestly. But I think the gun issue in particular does largely break down among people who know what they're talking about and people who don't. And I think that I personally experienced that when I was wanting more laws and more regulations. I didn't understand anything about guns. I couldn't tell you the first thing about how they even work. Like, what is it about pulling the trigger that makes it go bang? I had no idea. But I had this concept in my mind that we have to crack down on it. And as I learned more about the technology that it is and about the legal landscape, once you actually start going and buying guns, you realize, well, holy crap, there's like 50 forms I got to fill out, and there's all this bureaucracy and all these you can't put this attachment on it or else it becomes that, and then you realize, like, this is not, none of this is keeping us safe at all. There's nothing about this that prevents a crazy person from doing crazy things if they want to. And if the crazy person does decide to do crazy things, it's up to me to defend myself and my family first. And so that's a short version of how I came around to this philosophically. And I'm I'm glad I learned that a little bit quicker, because of course the gun market just went crazy the last couple of years. It's like if you're trying to buy guns or ammo, since 2020, it's you used to be able to afford things. Now you can't anymore.
Right. Yeah. And everything's just skyrocketing, and I don't see that slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting, though, and you touched on this, because I was going to ask you about the concept of personal responsibility. And for me, what I think that gun owners and concealed carriers really understand and take they don't take it lightly is the idea of being personally responsible for your own safety.
Mm-hmm.
And so my question to you is, why do you think that that's so important? And also, why do you think that so many people seem to lack this accountability to be responsible for themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I had a clean answer to that. But that is the harsh reality, that I don't have to be anti-police or anti-emergency responders or anything like that to recognize that if someone comes to do me harm, I am my own first and last responder. If they're late to arrive to the scene, I have nobody to help me other than me. If for some reason the police can't get to me, maybe there's some sort of obstruction, or maybe they get shot themselves or something, I can't be helped in that situation. I think it's just a comfort thing. Like, we'd like to believe that there's some higher parental force. Like, I don't mean like God or something. I mean like a human force. Like, there's just good guys who will watch over us at all times, and we're safe because of them. And I hope that everybody has, community, that there are capable emergency responders. But there's no, unless you can afford a security person to live at your house 24/7 or to follow you around when you're going grocery shopping or anything like that. That is a fantasy. And that's a fantasy that will be broken when evil confronts you in that way. And I think, another formative thing for me too, in deciding that I wanted to learn more about all of this and change the way I think about it philosophically was, can't remember if that was the same year, but there was the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And that one, I don't know if that was the first, but that was the most high quality. The guy live streamed it. He had a GoPro or whatever. And there's an argument to be made for not watching these things, but sometimes I want to know what evil is present in the world. I want to know what that looks like, whether it's wise to look at it or not. And I did. And it's such high quality footage to see what happened. It's horrible, obviously. But in that situation, you've got all these people. Some of them are on their knees begging for this guy to please show them mercy. You got people trying to stop him and barely missing, like a tackle attempt, getting shot themselves. And it's like, all right, in a situation like that, I would hope that I would have the bravery to do something about it. But all I know is I'm not ever going to get down on my knees and beg for my life before a crazy person like that. I'm not saying that he won't kill me. He might, but I will never submit to that sort of person and beg for mercy in the way that happened. When you see it, and it's not just a concept, it's like it's on a clear video that you can actually watch. Yeah, the choice is very clear. I will not submit to those people, and I don't think anybody should.
So, Matt, to that point, right, I spent a lot of time in the law enforcement world, right, over a decade as a police officer. And I got to tell you, there's only been one or two times where I was actually present at the moment of crime. And though I wanted to be there and all my partners wanted to be there at the moment of crime, really, when it comes down to it, you are your own savior. And if you can't do that, then we're probably only going to be there simply to clean it up or write the report. So I think you've touched on a really salient point, is that's part of the whole process here, is getting people to wake up that you've got to be responsible for yourself, because nobody else is going to be there to do it. On the other thing, on the Christchurch shooting that you talked about, I too caught the video. I think it's been mainly scrubbed from the internet, but I caught the video that was live streamed that was there, and I can tell you from experience, that's what it looks like in those shootings. And I think that's important for those who are, one, resilient enough mentally to be able to do so, but also curious enough to see what evil is like. And I'm so glad you were willing to do that, to be able to see that, because I think that's the awakening of the soul that people need to do for those willing to do so and emotionally strong enough to do so, to be able to see what evil is like from the other side, so they can learn, hey, this is the things I need to do to begin to prepare myself to protect myself and those that I love. So I got to say, from my perspective, I can't commend you enough for the resiliency of heart that it took for you to do that.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate the kind words, and it's interesting to hear it from the law enforcement perspective too, because that's not a part of my background at all, and I have no idea what it's like to come upon a crime scene and have to process all of that, or have to intervene in a crime in progress, or any of that stuff. But I think especially when I'm younger, or when I was younger, it's just like, and maybe a lot of it too is like, I'm more grown up now. I've got a family. I have more to protect than I did when I was 20.
Mm-hmm. That changes everything.
So maybe that's a big change in it too. But I think it's like my younger self would have just thought, oh, there's probably some big tough policeman like Adam who's gonna come take care of me if something like that happens. So who cares, really? I'll rely on him. I don't have to rely on me.
Not at all.
And the chance that any of us are going to become victimized in the way that happened at, say, Christchurch or anywhere else, very, very low. But that's the same reason you wear a seatbelt. Like, the chance that I get in a car crash on my way into town later is next to zero. But I'm still going to protect myself against the risk that entails. And so that's that's been the philosophy that's been developing for me for the last X amount of years. And I'm really glad that it's gone that way, because it just from kind of like a tech perspective, like firearm tech is really cool. I'm not a good guy like for working with my hands, or working with my hands. All I've done my entire life is read books and think about things. So I don't have the skills to fix things or build things or make things. But the more you learn about guns and how all the parts fit together and how to maintain them and how they all operate, like, there's a lot of just fun in that too. That's really captured my interest in learning about this. And so that's been a great part of it too. Just learning how to work on things, how to work with things, how to build things. That's been really enjoyable.
Well, there are plenty of people in the gun community that can relate with that.
Yeah.
There are tons of gun junkies out there for sure that just go, rabbit hole diving into all of the ballistics behind it and everything. I mean, you can go for days down those kind of rabbit holes. So yeah, you're preaching to the choir. That's for sure. So because of your experience, Matt, and because of your channel and what you do every day, I wanted to touch on, for our audience, some of the current events, especially gun related, that you think that the 2A community should be paying attention to right now. Do you have anything that comes to mind, or a few things that we should have on our radar?
Well, I would guess that they probably have a few things for me, to be honest. But I think what the most significant change that we should all be paying attention to is probably the Bruen decision, just because the Supreme Court has reworked how Second Amendment claims are going to be evaluated in federal courts at this point. And now it's going to be this historical evaluation, how the law in question, say in Oregon, for example, where they just passed this ballot measure, how that compares to what has been, how that compares to historical firearm restrictions in this country, whether it will survive scrutiny or not. But and I'm not a lawyer, so don't take my word for it. Do your own reading or consult someone who is a lawyer. But a simpler way of understanding that is the bar for states to clear for all of these gun restrictions to be constitutionally square. It's going to be a little bit higher. It's going to be a little bit tougher. And that's going to have a lot of implications for states like New York, for example, where the Bruen case was originated from, and states like Oregon with this ballot measure, where who knows if that's going to survive or not. But it's so interesting from a political perspective, because you see how divergent so many states are going now. We have a lot of states, Montana included, that have opened up, that we've become a constitutional carry state, where your gun rights have been expanded. And then you have a lot of these coastal states where gun rights are becoming more restricted than they ever have been, and places like California and New York, where they never see a gun restriction proposal that they seem to refuse. But that's as far as like the politics of it. That's what I'm watching. I don't the stuff coming out of the White House and some members of Congress about a renewed assault weapons ban and things like that. I don't think that stands much of a chance. So I don't pay much attention to that or put a lot of stock in it. But there's no doubt that these states are going to continue, and how the courts evaluate these new state laws will probably be the biggest legal and political thing to watch.
And I've heard some sheriffs talking about that they're not going to enforce some of these laws as well. Have you heard that, Adam?
Oh yeah, I mean that's a pretty common thing. At least where I come from, Colorado and Arizona, nobody cares where I'm at now. But in Colorado, we've had massive amounts of sheriffs say, "Well, we're just not going to enforce these things because they just don't view it as constitutional."
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the Oregon thing, the thing that's so upsetting to me, I have a personal love of Oregon. I went to college there. It's a great place. I would have stayed there if I could have found a job, but I couldn't. And then I ended up back in Montana, and that's for the best anyway. But I do love that state, and there's a lot of great places in it. It's like many states, it's overrun, or it's controlled by, Portland, and a lot of states have their Portland that runs the rest of the state. But what is upsetting about it is it wasn't like, these loonies who go to the state capitol or the governor there just imposed this on the citizenry. They all voted for this by ballot measure, and the just the concept that people are voting to try to disarm their neighbors. That number one, it's disheartening, because it's like, well, you should have more respect for your neighbor than that. But number two, it's actually the opposite of what you should want. I want to know that my neighbor has, that he's got a gun safe and he knows how to use the guns that are in it. Because if there's a threat that comes to my neighborhood, I want to know that we can handle it. I don't want to vote to send, and they're not going to do this in Oregon, but if we continue voting this way, to send confiscation squads through my neighborhood or something like that. It's the fact that this was by the vote of the people, and I respect the will of the people. That's an important concept. I'm not dismissing that. But when the will of the people is the violation of the rights of their neighbors and theoretically the confiscation of their property, that's a problem. That's a big time cultural problem, and that's worrisome.
It almost seems like it's really the return to a true democracy, which to me is a scary thing, versus a republic.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing, what I saw in the Oregon thing. It's the same thing that's happened in Hawaii, right? As they've restricted so many different gun things. Same thing in New York. And it seems like more of a republic approach versus democracy would be better.
You're exactly right. That's a point I always used to hear, and I thought it was more academic than anything. It's like, yeah, we're a republic, but we have democratic mechanisms. We make decisions through the democratic process. But what you're really getting at is the key point there, that does our government exist to protect the rights of the people, or does it exist to enforce the whims of the majority? Yeah. And we might value majority rule when it's appropriately limited, as in secondary to the rights of the people. But as soon as we just have tyranny of the majority, where 51% of people, it's what's the metaphor? 2 wolves and a sheep voting for what's for dinner. That's what you get when you have unfettered democracy. And
that's a quotable, Adam.
I stole that from someone. I don't know.
You did? Oh, well, that's still a good quotable.
But that is what pure democracy will get you, and that's why it's not an academic point. That it for all the talk of our democracy being at risk and all of this, read the Federalist Papers, read anything from the Founding Fathers. Democracy was the enemy. Democracy was to be mitigated against. That was not the founding purpose of this country. The establishment of government, as outlined in the Declaration, was not to serve the whims of the majority. It was to protect the rights of the individual, and we're sacrificing that. And I think in the gun context, probably more than any. I mean, we think about all the threats to your speech rights. all the threats to your privacy rights in the context of search and seizure, and all your other classic Bill of Rights, constitutional rights. That's another thing that's encouraging, though, for a right that has been historically ignored by the Supreme Court, to see them taking up some of these gun cases and actually establishing some precedent to answer the question of what that right to bear arms really means. That's encouraging. And as someone who's been discouraged by political developments of the last couple of years, especially, it's encouraging to see some wins in that area, to see a little more definition provided to our Second Amendment, and I think to see some broader cultural interest in it, at least in certain places, if not Oregon or New York. But I think that overall the trend in the country, I think, is maybe turning a little more pro-gun, rights, which is nice.
Yeah, I would argue that the last couple of years have been have been a wake-up call for some people, just in exactly the area that you're talking about, with personal responsibility. And I've personally met a lot of people that have changed the way that they look at their own personal safety because of a lot of the things that have happened over the last couple of years. So as much as we can say that it's, not always been so great, I think there are some silver linings in that. I think a lot of people are reevaluating maybe something is awakening inside them to go, I haven't really thought about that before. Maybe I should start thinking about that. Maybe I should start giving some attention and focus to that.
Can I flip the script and ask you guys a little bit about how you arrived at that conclusion? Have you always been a 2A gun people, or did something inspire that in you?
Do you want me to go, Adam?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've always been pro 2A, but I didn't realize the personal responsibility involved in the reality of being able to defend myself and my family until I was confronted with an incident in my life in 2016 that was, you could call it a near miss, although it wasn't, literally a near miss. Nobody shot at me or anything, but it was a near miss. And that had that not gone exactly the way that it went, I might not be here today.
Wow.
And wake up call is an understatement as to what that incident did for me. It was a catalyst that lit something inside of me that went, wow, I never really considered that anything bad would ever really happen to me. Like many people, I walked around and thought, well, it could, but probably it won't. And maybe someday I should learn how to, carry and shoot a handgun. But yeah, that's down the road. I don't need to worry about that right now. But when that thing happened in my life, that near miss, so to speak, that was my huge wake up call. And it lit something inside of me that went, I will never, ever feel that helpless again. I will never, ever be in that position again, because being helpless and having no way to call for help is one of the worst feelings you can ever feel. So I'm lucky that that's all that it was just a wake up call. But that, for me, that's what happened.
Wow.
So Matt, in answer to your question, right, I did not grow up in this country. I grew up in West Africa. And so it was a missionary kid. So in that context, right, because in West Africa and a lot of countries in the world, as you know, firearms are not allowed unless you're a very select class of people. And so because of that, the crime there was so high. Now, I moved around a bit in Africa and, of course, around the world. And in that case, I saw over and over and over that all over the world, things are far less safe in America. Yet here we are, the most armed society in America. So that was impressionable upon a young mind. On top of that, I had the fortune of growing up in a I would say a Christian home, but also a reader's home, and so I was constantly had access to books from Old England, from early colonial days in America, from the beginning days, and all. And so I grew up reading those things, both fiction and nonfiction of those era. And my parents too pushed, to say, the Federalist Papers and all these different things that spent a lot of time reading the historical context of America. And I saw, having lived it in countries where firearms were not allowed, and saw the amount of crime, but also reading how the founding of America and on, how that, I think, created the greatest society the world has ever known. And really through the force of, one, free speech, and two, the force of arms to be able to protect that free speech. And so to me, it's almost as if from birth and through the raising as a young child, that was, there was never a catharsis moment, say, that maybe you went through or Lora went through, because that was kind of ingrained in from the beginning through the study of the founding and so much of our older era. And so to me, that became a natural thought process. And the fact that we have New Yorks, we have Californias, we have Hawaii's, or really you think geopolitically, the Great Lakes states, the eastern, certainly upper eastern seaboard states, and the western coast states, that they're just so anti-gun, yet the heartland of America, which is really generally more crime-free, more everything compared to the others, and yet that's where the more guns are there. That kind of cemented all the beliefs that I'd grown up reading about and learning about from the founding of our fathers. And I guess so that led towards where I became later in life.
Yeah, solid philosophical basis. That's
yeah.
I will raise my son the same way. He's 1 year old now, and I think about how we're going to educate him, how we're going to keep him away from all the bad ideas, or not keep away, but to understand why the bad ideas are bad, and to understand why the values that built this country are morally correct and practically successful. To your point, Lora, it was interesting to me that you mentioned the attitude of thinking that would never happen to you. And a lot of times opponents of arming yourself, I often hear the argument, statistically, if you have a gun or you carry a gun, it's much more likely that you'll injure yourself or potentially someone else than it is that you'll ever defend yourself in a situation in which someone attacks you. And I've always kind of laughed about that scenario playing out in my head, because it's like, well, what am I supposed to do if someone does, though? Am I going to say, oh, well, at least this is a statistically unlikely death,
right?
That I will take solace in that
head.
as you shoot me in the face, because I have no ability to stop it. And it sucks to learn it the hard way, but yeah, man,
I almost did.
Yeah, I've never understood that thinking, where it's like, okay, I'll just as long as statistics theoretically protect me, I don't need to be practically protected in the event that I'm the anomaly rather than the statistical trend. But that is how it ends up going.
Well, that is the approach that many people take to things that they don't want to look at truthfully or with any. It's a scary thing. It's a scary proposition to think about, right? And I think a lot of people would rather just turn a blind eye to it and not think about it, because it's easier. Quite frankly, it is. But the repercussions for it later could be not good.
Yeah.
So, all right, Adam, did you have anything else you wanted to ask Matt? I have one last question for him before we wrap up here.
Matt, tell us your why. Tell us behind what you do, who you are, and not just your professional side of your website and all that you do, but I've gotten to know you through the power of the internet recently, the first time we've actually met here, and it's very impressive to me. And the why is always more important than the how to me. So I'm curious, what's your why?
You just mean as like a motivator, or the reason why I do what I do, or?
Yeah, the motivators behind it, the reasons. Yeah, help people, all that other stuff. But what's the grounding basis behind it?
I think that the reason I do what I do is a lot of what you just spoke to with the question that I asked you, which is to preserve a solid philosophical foundation for our country and for our society. I got into this as a pure hobby. I started making video game content on YouTube 10 years ago. And it was just my friends and I messing around on Call of Duty. And if you've ever played online video games, you'll know that the people who yell at you, or at least when they used to allow that, the people who yell at you, it's always hilarious. And I started recording that, and it was a hobby thing. And then over time, it built into something else, and one thing led to another, and it became a little more viable. And I wanted to talk about politics and news and all these things. But as all of that happened, suddenly I'm watching, as I described, the people that I thought were my team, or the people that I thought agreed with, started diminishing or attacking what I thought we all agreed were the founding values. The idea that, well, even if that person disagrees with me, he has not just the rights to speak, but a whole host of rights that go along with being a fellow citizen of this country or just being a human being. Suddenly it was like, no, if that guy says something we don't like, he has to be shut down. We have to diminish his ability to speak. We have to deperson him if we can. And that really has pushed me into what I do now. And the reason I continue to do it is because I'm highly entertained by the theater of politics, and I like the show, but I really do care about preserving the values that built this country and made it great. And I see them commonly under attack, but commonly misunderstood in sort of the way we were talking about earlier, where we think that our country, for example, like as you mentioned, that democracy is a founding value or the cornerstone value, when in fact it isn't. Or we think that that we have certain concepts of why our country is the way that it is that have sort of morphed over time or become, I suppose, distanced from what they were originally. And so that's how and why I try to break down current events is through that sort of philosophical or first principles type lens, and to try to extract the bigger, broader points than just say like whatever Tuesday's news is or something like that.
So if you're okay, Laura, I'd like to dig into this a little bit better if you got just a few more minutes.
Absolutely.
So we've kind of been doing the overall, 50,000 view of this thing. We've not dug into exact issues particularly. But as you began to do that, I don't know if it meant you had to kind of grow personal courage, or just decide, I don't care what other people think, I'm going to lay my views out there. I'd be curious about how that began for you. But have you found that as you started on an online platform that's grown exponentially here, literally more specifically stating your views in the political arena, probably business, religious, all the other things that you do, did you find that changed your circle of friends, that family either grew closer, grew distant, friends the same? Did you find that you lost business through it, that it grew? That step of courage that a lot of people are afraid to have, how did that affect you?
Yeah. Well, the way I got into this on like a full-time basis was I did a normal desk job while sort of doing this on the side, and kind of hoping that the employer would never discover the material. It was under an online moniker because, but
I feel you.
And they never did. But eventually I was placed under the management of someone I didn't really get along with, and it wasn't really working out. And my channel was a very small but not insignificant thing. But it was one of those cases where the world was just telling me, you're not supposed to be doing this. Whatever it is that you're doing at this desk, that's not it. Even though it was a comfortable job with decent benefits and okay pay, it was perfectly fine. But there was risk to leaving that. It made no sense at the time. But I remember calling my mom and saying, "Listen, I'm not supposed to be doing this job. I'm going to take what I have and try to build a YouTube channel, and we'll see how it goes."
And she's like, "What?"
No, my mom's very supportive, and she's great. So she said, "Okay, all right." And the worst I would have had to suffer is the indignity of moving into my mom's basement, but I didn't. And so a lot of it was just circumstance of life, and then combined with necessity of metaphorically being thrown into the water, and it's like you're swimming now. Either this works or you're gonna crash and burn and have to pick up the pieces and start over. So that's how that happened. And thankfully I was able to build something that became sustainable. But it really has changed my life in every way by my own choice, though, and that's what I'm grateful for, because a lot of people who are politically outspoken, especially in the last few years, I think, You lose friends and family because you have some sort of forbidden opinion or you voted for the wrong guy or whatever. That's not really what's happened with me. But through the relationships that I've built online, I've become convinced, I've become a lot more clear-headed about who belongs in your life and why. And making sure that everybody who you include in your life wants to be there, provides a purpose, is not someone who is dragging you down for their own reasons without contributing anything of value to you. And I know that sounds very cutthroat, and the reality is it kind of is. But it's very scary. Like, I consider myself a loyal person. I try to maintain loyalty to friends and family, of course, but you have to be evaluating what relationships are important to you, and to have that courage to leave them behind when they are not providing that value. And so there was a period of my life as I built this channel, probably the last, I don't know, this started probably late 2016, early 2017, when some of the relationships I'd built online had helped convince me to move beyond things that were not helpful in my life. And that led me to find new friends who are much better resources in my life, to find my wife, and to have the family that I have now because of that encouragement, which I'm hugely grateful for. Sometimes you think it's just, I guess I maintained a lot of friendships and had a lot of relationships that were long standing relationships, but you realize it's like, well, what are we doing, or what is the value here other than we've been friends for a long time or something? You know, like, is there actually a shared fundamental value and purpose that we have here? Are we building something, or are we just kind of this is the way it is because that's the way it's always been? And
so could you speak a little bit to your balance between not creating an echo chamber within your relationships, to having the critical, the willingness to disagree without it becoming, maintaining a relationship without people that are willing to make it a destroyed relationship?
Yeah.
Right. Because oftentimes when people do what you're doing, I've found people end up, they create either an echo chamber, and they lose, right, they lose concept to reality. And it sounds like you've threaded that line really well. So doing that, because our audience, I think, could learn from your wisdom here, would you be willing to talk to that?
Yeah, about how to maintain pushback in your relationships, I suppose.
Well, appropriately,
that's a big, when I talk about the values that are important to me to maintain my friendship, the ones that have survived for me are the ones who are open-minded in that way. And I'm glad that you clarified that point, because it's not like I have this long list of requirements to be my friend, or to maintain a family relationship or something like that. Family in particular is extremely important. And I think if you can give anybody the benefit of the doubt, it's got to be a family member. Preserving family integrity is right up there with the top values that should be upheld. So for me, if you're the sort of person that can allow someone else to hold a differing view and not view them as morally inferior, or try to sabotage them in some way or stop them from speaking, that's a huge starting point. The friendships that have maintained for me are those people. Some of them are political, some of them are not at all, but they're the sort of person that can have a good faith discussion with someone they disagree with. And so obviously that's something that I try to uphold myself as well. I've tried to change, even on the gun topic. There are several friends of mine who I've tried to change, and people changed my mind in the first place. And the ones that work well, even if they don't come around to the concept of guns, they're still interested in the reason why I think what I think, and they're
at least being open-minded.
Yeah, and instead of thinking like, okay, that guy likes guns, so he's a Nazi or something like that, like whatever. That's. I suppose how do you thread that line? Well, I suppose that's probably the main point of evaluation for me is, can you have a amicable conversation of disagreement? And if you can, like, big points, you'll probably stick around for me. There are, obviously I want to surround myself with people of value alignment in general, but I'm not going to become so hostile to ideas that I don't like as to exclude people from my entire life because they don't agree with me on every single thing. That itself would be a betrayal of the entire reason I got into this in the first place. So I don't know if that answers your question perfectly squarely, but that's I suppose my thinking on it.
So if I nutshelled it, could we say wildly disparate views, no matter what it is, but yet both an openness on either side to be willing to not only tolerate, but to celebrate somebody's other's different viewpoint and being kind of open with it? Would that be okay?
Yeah. Someone who's not enraged by the question why, I suppose. It's like the little kid thing or the Socratic method. That's you should be able to answer the question why. And I, of course, include myself in that. If someone comes to me and asks, why do you think what you think? I'm not going to become shocked or outraged because that implies that they might disagree. That's how we find the best ideas in the world is we ask why, we get to those first principles, we allow ideas to compete, and the best ones rise, and the truth emerges. And if you're someone who is on board with that, I think there's a lot of there's probably some at least friendly relationship we can maintain if we get there. But that's becoming less and less common. It seems, I mean, I don't know, when I was in school 10 years ago, like I didn't consider myself conservative, libertarian, whatever at the time, but they had their clubs on campus and they were cool. I liked those guys. I didn't necessarily agree with them, but like, it's not like I wanted them shut down or their club banned or their speakers banned from campus or something like that. It's like, those are good guys who I think are wrong and I would probably vote against, but that's okay. And we need to get back to that somehow, but I don't know how you do that without that core value that we were just talking about.
Wow, really good stuff. And we went past the mark, Matt, that you told us we needed to go to. So I apologize.
Anything
for that.
for a fellow Montanan, but I appreciate it.